Okay, hi everyone. So this next section is all about social development. And maybe you've noticed through this unit, my plan is to take each strand, so we'll talk about physical, social, and moral development, and I plan to try to take each one from womb to tomb, and then you can kind of put these strands together. So with social development, as with others, psychologists have identified a critical period, and it depends on what area or what strand of development we're looking at, but this critical period is something that psychologists have determined must be healthy for the individual, or this human will not develop correctly. This human might have problems later on. And some of this is debatable. If you think back to Freud and his period, his stages of psychosexual development, some of these things you might think, that doesn't quite make sense. But at least with social development and many of these, there is a lot of research behind it, so it does make sense. So at this point, you kind of have to assume with social development, the critical period is right away, and the critical stage is attachment. So up until about a year, infants don't actually mind being with strange people. And maybe it's because everyone's strange to them. So there's a picture of little Anthony when he was itty bitty, and that's actually his Uncle Brent and his grandma. And he was awesome. The family loved little Tony, or Big Tony, actually. We called him Big Tony because he was a giant and he was a big chunker. But people loved being with him because he was just this happy, cute little go-lucky baby. He liked being with people. He smiled at people. He liked being held. He was, real squishy and cute and all that. But then at about a year, all infants generally develop something called stranger anxiety. And that literally is what happens all of a sudden. And this can even be with people who aren't horribly strange. Like maybe for us, it was grandparents, people that our children were quite familiar with, but just didn't see on a regular basis, maybe just monthly. And those poor grandparents, their hearts were broken when their little grandchild would freak out and cry if we left them alone with them, even for a minute. So the question is, why do you think this starts at about a year? And it's typical for all children. Well, at about a year, kids start to walk, or babies, I should say, start to walk. They become mobile. And if you think about way, way back, and this, of course, is an evolutionary psychology point of view, but it certainly is not very debatable today. People agree with this perspective. So back in those days, that kids that didn't develop stranger anxiety by the time they walked, they might have just wandered off with some, whatever. They wandered off and they died. And those that had stranger anxiety lived long enough to procreate, have kids, and that particular trait was then passed on to you and to all of us who have survived today. So let's talk about attachment. So attachment is the most important social construct an infant must develop. And this is simply a bond with a caregiver. And a researcher, biologist, and psychologist named Lorenz discovered some animals form attachment through imprinting. You've probably heard about this before. So baby ducklings develop an immediate strong attachment with the very first object it sees moving. Hopefully that object is the duckling's mother, but this researcher, Conrad Lorenz, actually imprinted ducklings to humans and dogs and even balls. Now, yeah, like balls you throw. Now, do humans imprint? No, of course not. Otherwise, we would probably all be attached to doctors and nurses because that's usually the first person that we see. Now, there's another fascinating concept about attachment that Harry Harlow showed with monkeys. His research was regarding touch, and he proved that touch is critical for higher level mammals like most of you to develop attachment. And let me just show you the experiment.
Harry Harlow is definitely not monkeying around. When he set out to discover how monkeys formed attachment with their mothers. What he did was he put baby monkeys in a cage with two kinds of mothers, a cloth mother and a wired mesh mother. And what he discovered was no matter what The infant monkey was always more attached to the mother that had soft cloth around it. It would always run to the mother and say, "Oh, mother, I want to touch you," and the monkey ignored the wired mesh mother. Before Harry Harlow came along, it was thought that babies formed attachment by giving babies food. In other words, if you gave a baby some food, it became attached to you. But Harry Harlow wanted to prove this, to see if it was correct. So what he did was he first put two monkeys in a cage, the cloth mother with a nipple and some milk, and the wire mother with a nipple with some milk. And of course the baby was more attracted to the cloth mother with the nipple. But then he put a nipple on the wire mesh mother. And he wanted to see and no nipple on the cloth mesh mother. And he wanted to see if the monkey was more attracted to the food or the soft touch of the cloth mother. And to his surprise, the monkey always went to the mother with the soft touch, only to reach over to grab some food, but run back to the soft touch mother, showing us that touch is very important in forming attachment. Next, Harlow wanted to show that baby monkeys, in response to fear, would always jump to the cloth mother. In this case, he put looks like a bear with a drum, and the monkey got freaked out and jumped to the cloth mother. I mean, I would jump too. It looks like something out of a Stephen King movie.
So I'll post that whole video up on my Moodle page right below this YouTube video lecture. That video is on YouTube. But it's pretty fascinating if you think about it. And so this formed what we understand today as this concept of a critical period, the optimum period shortly after birth, when an organism's exposure to certain stimuli or experiences produce proper development. So attachment, the critical period for social development, is right after birth, and the most important stage here is attachment. So if an infant is deprived of touch, this infant might have trouble forming attachment when they are older. That's the whole premise behind this theory, that attachment is so important that if it doesn't happen, then there's going to be serious problems later on. So how does this study apply to human beings? Well, further studies have been done with humans in orphanages. Some orphans were touched daily, so like good touch, not bad touch here, and so maybe, stroking on the head, that kind of touch, and other orphans were fed, but they were never touched. And the ones that were never touched became socially isolated, and when they were tested at the age of 12, so many years later, they had lower IQs than the ones that were touched. And when you think about this, it kind of almost makes you cry. So this, thinking about like ethics and research, this definitely was a cruel kind of experiment, and it wouldn't happen today. So Mary Ainsworth came up with these types of attachment. She created something called the strange situation. And she placed young children into rooms that they'd never been in before, and then asked their parents to quietly go out the door. And then she observed how the child reacted when the parent went away. And she asked the parents to come back in the room and observed how the child reacted to their mom or dad's return. She discovered three main types of attachment. First, there's the secure attachments, and this is about 66% of infants. They were fairly secure when the parent was in the room. They confidently explored the room, and when the parent left, they became distressed. And they came back to the parent for a hug when the parent returned. Then there's avoidant attachments. This is about 21% of infants from Ainsworth's research here. These infants explored the environment even when the parents left the room, and when the parent returned, they didn't go to the parents for comfort. And then third, we have the anxious/ambivalent attachment. This is about 12% of infants. These individuals show stress when the parents leave, but when the parents return, they didn't actually seek comfort. So here's a clip from that research.
But can the essential elements of home life be translated into a standard laboratory setting for controlled scientific study? After conducting extensive observations of parents and children at home, a student of Bowlby's, Mary Ainsworth, devised such a procedure, called the strange situation, which places the child under some stress. It has become the most widely used, standardized way to assess the quality of a child's attachment to their caregiver. Here the researchers are recording how 14-month-old Lisa responds in this attractive but unfamiliar setting. How will she react to a stranger? What will happen when her mother leaves the room? And when she returns? It's Lisa's behavior when her mother returns, what psychologists call the reunion, that they are particularly interested in.
Most importantly is to look for the type of balance that a child strikes between an attachment need and, on the other hand, to explore the play material.
Once Lisa has settled down to play, a stranger enters the room and sits in a chair reading a magazine. After a couple of minutes, the stranger attempts to interact with Lisa. Soon after, Lisbeth gets a cue to leave the room. The stranger tries to comfort Lisa, but in vain. Lisbeth comes back into the room, and the camera records how Lisa reacts. Now the first part of the procedure is over, and Lisbeth settles Lisa down again. The stranger leaves them alone together. And soon after, Lisbeth goes too. Lisa is on her own. Her distress is plain to see. Once again, the efforts of the stranger to console Lisa are to no avail. But Lisbeth manages to calm her almost at once, and shortly afterwards the observation ends. Lisa showed outward signs of what's called secure attachment.
And some of that research is just fascinating. And having lived through that as a parent, I remember trying to leave my kid in like the nursery or something at church or some area where, the babies are supposed to go and play. And it just never, during this stranger anxiety period, it never worked out. But the stage ends quick enough. Usually maybe it lasts a couple months and then it's over. So I'm going to end here, but there will be a second video that you'll be expected to watch tonight.